So here we are in our fifth and final event of the series, Spirit in Action is the title of the series, Civic Engagement and the Religious Life. And before I introduce the facilitator of our panel discussion tonight, Reverend Rich Tafel, we will pause for a moment of prayer brought to us by Terry Crenshaw.
Dear loving Spirit Creator, we approach you today in wonder and gratitude for the beautiful world we inhabit and which inhabits us. We have the possibility for limitless joy by aligning ourselves with truth and love in harmony with you and all that comes from you. Help us to think in harmony with your truth. Help us to speak in alignment with our understanding. Help us to see clearly the way we are to bring you into the world. Let it start today, Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Terry. So, I would like to introduce to you all Reverend Rich Tafel, who again will be moderating our panel today. Reverend Tafel serves as the minister of the Church of the Holy City in Washington, D.C. He has an undergraduate degree in philosophy and a graduate degree in theology from Harvard University, and is ordained, and his first job was assistant minister of Harvard University's Memorial Church. Realizing that social change agents too often lacked the strategy and funding to have large impact, Reverend Tafel began working in the policy arena first as the director of adolescent health at the MA Department of Public Health. He then went on to launch the Log Cabin Republicans in an effort to bridge the gap between the conservative and gay communities in America. He was one of America's earliest political activists campaigning for gay marriage. In 1999, he wrote Party Crasher, published by Simon Schuster, offering a new inclusive vision for American politics. With his knowledge of politics and vision for social change, Reverend Tafel launched his first company that helped nonprofits engage in public policy. He worked domestically with College Summit on access for low-income students to college. In addition, he created the Global Strategy for AIDS Responsibility Project that helped facilitate the delivery of AIDS drugs to Africa. In addition, they worked with Brazil, Mexico, and Jamaica on ending HIV/AIDS discrimination. Reverend Tafel's proudest achievements are taking a lead in the 1980s as a leader in the battle against AIDS, LGBT rights, and the effort to support African countries suffering through the AIDS epidemic. Reverend Tafel has spent the last 4 years leading conclaves to address the growing hyper-partisanship in our culture. He's a frequent commentator on politics on TV. Welcome, Reverend Tafel. Thank you for giving your time and energy to this.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca and Shada and Terry and all the people who put this together. I am really proud of the denomination for taking our theology, which says it has to be put to use. It must be engaged in the world. And I think that's fantastic that we've done this series. It's been so well attended. And one of the things about our theology also is that we know that the Lord really loves diversity. And so tonight we really wanted to get where the rubber meets the road. People who have done something in their life to take what they've thought in theory and put it in practice in the public square, in civic life, from very different perspectives in very different ways, so that all of us can kind of just think about how we could engage in our own way. It's going to be different for everybody. So we're going to look at these case studies to see how different people have figured out how they can engage, and hopefully more and more of us within our faith and outside of our faith can engage in the public square for good. So thank you so much for organizing this. Thank you everybody for coming. And I'm looking forward to our panel. The structure tonight is that the four of us on the panel will speak for probably about, let's say 10 to 12 minutes each. And we'll make sure not to go over. And then, because we really want this to be a dialogue. So we really want to provoke questions and get you engaged and see where you are, what you think, and how we can take all the lessons from this whole series and apply it to our lives personally and engage. So it really will be about you and what you want to do and what questions you have from the stories that you've heard. Does that sound like a good plan? Good. Okay, great. Excellent. I see everybody saying yes, nobody's saying no. So let's move ahead. Let me start by introducing the panelists that will be speaking of those diverse paths that they've decided to engage with. So I'll read the biographies first, and we'll be going in the order of Paige will be speaking first, Shalonda, and then Annabel. So let me read their biographies before we get started, so you know who they are. And they're much smarter. Their biographies are nice and tight and short, and unlike Rich Tafel's, that was too long, but I appreciated it. So Paige Morahan is a doctor and a professor emerita at Drexel University College of Medicine. She is the founding director of Drexel's Elam and Famer Leadership Development Programs. Her current passion is focusing on building virtual communities of practice for the advancement of women, focusing on anti-racism, a focus on voter rights, and she's an inspirational photographer where she seeks to connect people around the world. Her academic leadership positions have included associate provost and department chair. So thank you, Paige, for bringing all that to us tonight. We're grateful, and you'll be our first speaker. She'll be followed by Shalonda Ingram. Shalonda Ingram is an expert in building community with an expertise specifically in placemaking, belonging, and inclusion training. She's a spiritual entrepreneur, and she hosts dialogues that empower participants. Leading organizations around the country have partnered with Shalonda to take their ideas and turn them into realities, establish strategies for ongoing relationships, and also discover how to elevate diverse voices. So thank you, Shalonda, for being here tonight. She'll be our second speaker. And our third speaker is Annabel Park. Annabel is a documentary filmmaker, a political consultant, an activist known for her innovative projects. She has a passion to promote democracy and social change through the use of conversations and storytelling. And to do this, she has experimented with in-person gatherings, community organizing, and media projects. She's made numerous TV and radio appearances and has been invited to speak throughout the United States and also Europe and Asia. And her writings have been published at CNN.com and the Washington Post. She has also co-directed and co-produced 9500 Liberty, a critically acclaimed documentary. And she's also created and produced The Story of America, a documentary exploring America's division and documenting Reverend William Barber's Moral Monday movements in North Carolina. In addition, she's the founder of the Coffee Party, a grassroots organization that promoted and still promotes dialogue and democratic reforms. And it was a response to the Tea Party in 2010. And if you know anything about Annabel, she's very much online, and she's launched numerous online communities, including The Talk on Main Street, Bridge the Divide, America Welcomes Refugees, Libyans in Americas United for Peace, and Facing Humanity. So we have a very exciting and diverse panel tonight that will share their stories. And I hope as they share their stories, they'll also add more flavor of their bio that, you know, isn't captured in the few words that I said, but we're all a product of our biographies, and our biographies impact everything that we do. So we're going to hear more about them. So before I start with Paige, are there any questions before we get started with the panel? Okay, great. Paige, would you kick us off and share with us your engagement in the civic arena, and also, if you can, weave in there possibly maybe somehow, you know, how your faith informs this work?
Okay, I'm going to start with sharing the screen. You know, as an academic, PowerPoints are my stock in trade, and so I wanted to approach this from the perspective of someone in what's now becoming known as the third act stage of life. And, you know, what can you do primarily from your computer at home when you're my age? Okay, so that's where I'm coming from for this particular talk. letting you know what I'm doing. And I do encourage all of you who are interested to look at that website for the Third Act organization. It's really for how people my age can work with younger people to affect social change of various kinds. And the environment is the one they're working on the most right now. So at my age, you know, you really have to focus, decide what you're going to focus on. And I just ran across this, I've subscribed to Yes Magazine for umpteen years. And this was just in one of the current issues. You know, what brings you joy? What are you good at? And what's the work that needs to be doing? And then what's the intersection? And that's where they suggest you focus. And that goes along with these points that I've used to deciding what I want to focus on when I make a choice about what to take on or what to let go of. And I now teach this to people who are also in the transitioning stage and having to look at energy in life. So that's just the way I do it. So what has led me to this focus? So I'm very interested in these three areas: women's rights and women's health rights, anti-racism efforts, and anti-LGBTQ efforts. Women's rights I've worked on for 25 plus years in founding that ELAM program that Rich mentioned, which is to advance women to leadership positions in medical, dental, public health schools, et cetera, around where we still, unfortunately, it's still a very male-dominated leadership group. And I still work in the international organization, which is both men and women, but it's about half women. And I particularly career coach women of color. That's on a volunteer basis. So that's one thing I do there. The anti-racism efforts, anti-LGBTQ, I'm involved in 3 different efforts. The one with convention, the Social Justice Committee, the one with my Methodist church. I'm involved with the Liberal Methodist Church, First United Methodist Church of Germantown. And we've had an effort for 30 years, and I've been involved with that. We've just finished, right before the pandemic, a racial audit to how do we become a truly anti-racist organization. We're now working on that. And the third organization that I'm working with is the Forum of Executive Women in Philadelphia. And I'm on the DEI committee, and particularly the inclusion committee. How do we make people feel welcome? I'm subsumed these 3 now under voting rights because I really have taken to heart Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and saying that you need to change the people who are making the laws and promulgating the policies. And I'm doing this from a nonpartisan perspective. I stay pretty clear on that. And frankly, that's because I live in Bernathen, the home of Mehmet Oz these days. So I really focus on staying nonpartisan, and I feel like we need to get voting rights from everyone in the country. If we could get everyone to vote, we would change. Everyone who could vote, we would get change in this country. So that's where I'm focused on. So how do I do this? Well, first, voting rights issues, they're innumerable ones. I won't go over all of these. There's access for voting. There's access for running for office. I don't know whether you know, I didn't, that access for office, many women are really ruled out of being able to run for office because while law firms let their lawyers run for office and keep them on the payroll and pay their health benefits, women often are not in that situation, so they lose their health benefits. So that means they really cannot run for office. So there are just so many, issues there. And then, of course, eliminating partisan funds. So so that's, I could pick all of those. So I work with primarily these 3 organizations. Common Cause, which is clearly nonpartisan. They're really trying to get people to vote, to have a better democratic country. Excuse me, a functioning democratic country, I should say. The League of Women Voters, which encompasses my interest in women, and the American Association of University Women. So that's all of these organizations make it very easy for people like me to become activists. They have superb infrastructure so that you can put in your zip code and it will tell you the email of the person that you're going to write to or call. They all have, particularly the Association of University Women has a 2-minute activist program. It's where you can do things in a short period of time. So I certainly recommend, and particularly Common Cause, I've been very impressed with what they do. So those are the 3 I work with the most. I've also worked with these, and to tell you kind of why. The Americans of Conscience is an interesting group that puts out a bi-weekly list of activities you can do. And one of the ones, and then they have a way of checking if you do it, you check a little box and it records it. What I like particularly is they have a section in their bi-weekly list of personally thanking legislators primarily who have done something good that might have been at risk for them. And so I definitely like to do that. I hand decorate postcards and send to them. They now have worked out a system where you can do it online, but I do still think the handwritten postcards have because people get so little positive impact. Spread the Vote is to really increase voter registration, and it raises money to make sure that people can get their papers to vote. So I like that. The Fair Districts was, of course, in Pennsylvania, was very active. We were trying to, and we made some progress in getting a better district representation than we had before. This is, with a 10-year change. The Defeat by Tweet is a fun one. This started with the tweets of Trump. And so you donate, say, a cent a tweet up to $10 a month. And so when there are egregious tweets that come out, you're donating money for this is primarily now, it's morphed into electing representatives of color and senators of color. So that's kind of a fun way to contribute. And then the Center for Artistic Activism, I took one of their workshops and I would encourage people to do that. It was very informative, educational for learning the psychology behind influencing people. And they do lots of fun things, which I keep up with just for interest. So what do I do? Those are the organizations I work with the most. They're small acts that don't take much time. Signing petitions you can do online. It is best to let your name be published. So I do those often. Of course, you can donate money if you're in that situation. As I'm a retiree and we do have some funds that I put in my budget. The third one I really like, I've circled this. Common Cause is hooked up with a group that prepares positive videos, images, GIFs, and they say that one of the best ways to counteract disinformation is to flood with accurate, entertaining information. And this fits my whole approach of appreciative leadership to focus on the positive. So that's one of the ones that I do pretty routinely. Of course, calling congressperson or senator, they give a script. It's more impactful for you to call than it is to write, although I prefer to write, which I've circled below. usually say to hand tailor it and add a personal note, personal impact of the law, or how it would affect you if you can. And then write a letter to the editor. I've written numerous ones. I've only had one published in December in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I was very proud of that. And I did that during a workshop with Common Cause. And they have a workshop once a month where you all write a letter on a certain topic, and you get together in a small group, and what's a personal story you could add to it. And then I already mentioned the thank you postcards. So those are the small activities, and frankly, that's where I spend much of my time in those. There are ones that now are larger acts, writing personalized postcards to encourage voter registration, voting by mail. Research has shown that these personalized postcards do have an impact. I find it, frankly, gets to be overwhelming if you've got 100 to do. And so I'm now thinking of inviting people to a party to do some and break it up. Joining a group to meet with the legislature. Did that with Fair Districts when we were working on trying to get local Pennsylvania senators to act on the bill. We had the representatives were doing it, but the senators were not. That's a whole other issue, the dysfunction of the Pennsylvania legislature. So we met online, and you don't have to be the talk. Frankly, I was the one that took the notes. So you can, carve out an action that you feel comfortable with. Interacting with potential voters in text, phone calls, in person. I've done some of that, and I have some friends that love it, just love it to do these texts. I find that it goes too fast for me, so I tend not to do that one. But I've tried all of these, so I put my toe in the water to try them and find out, what I like and what I feel comfortable with. Then a new one that they're really focusing on is monitoring social media for mis and disinformation. And I've done some of that, and I may go back to that. And then, of course, there's going to rallies, marches, and vigils, which you can do now often online. So those are things that I've done, and I think that's it. So let me get out of the share.
Thank you, Paige. Very, very excellent and specific.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good case study of what you've done. I love it. And I think there's going to be a lot of good questions about that. So thank you.
And I can give the slides to someone
okay.
They've got lots of, websites which may be useful.
Excellent. Excellent. We're now going to shift to our next panelist. Shalonda Ingram is going to share her engagement in the public square and what brings her in that space. So Shalonda, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so where I'm coming from here is relatively personal. So civic engagement, I wanted to look at how I go about these things, not just the thing that I do, right? Like the output, but what does it actually take for me to personally move from awareness to action? Or what does it take maybe for me in partnership with, say, a venue that I'm working with or a community that I'm working with? So we'll get started. It's a little bit about me. ShalondaIngram.com is a location you can learn more. WarrenBrown.us is a platform that I developed. It's really a tool for personal healing and exploring your own universal human rights and really negotiation of human rights and what that's like for people of margin. And Bowman Wellness Center is a community that I advise in the wellness space. And that environment's unique. I'll share a little bit more about that later, but I've helped develop some language to bridge the divides that make it really difficult sometimes for people to have meaningful dialogue when there are extreme distinctions about the way that they may relate to things, right? Then there's Shine Diversity, which is a platform that is run by LGBTQ leaders in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. All of my work begins with land acknowledgements. I am an Indigenous descendant. I'm also a descendant of West African folks who were enslaved in this territory that we know as the US. I start my work with land acknowledgements for my wellness so that I can honor my ancestors and so that I can get myself into the space and so that I can be with the folks that I'm creating an experience with. When it's possible, I request that my clients take this on, add it to their websites, and engage with this sort of awareness as a practice to normalize acknowledgement, right? This is so critical in colonial spaces for me personally, due to the fact that I'm overcoming the context of harm, right, in order to just be there, right? So the more that folks can participate in dialogues of history, storytelling, and acknowledgement, it does create more space, I find, for folks on the margins to be present. There's a link here. This tool has been developed and leveraged to locate many of the Indigenous graves. It's also being leveraged in order for folks to learn whose land they're on at any given time if they're interested in participating in this practice. So my primary areas of focus are in the history of labor and dignity, right? That expresses through Born Brown, it expresses through placemaking, it expresses through, frankly, going to the grocery store for some Black people, if you're familiar with just what just happened in the Buffalo area. So the history of labor and dignity are really important throughout my work. Often I am advocating for myself and for other people of color as I'm just living my life or operating professionally, right? So I go into that work pretty deeply with Born Brown, with Shine Diversity, and with other opportunities to serve people who are, and organizations who are grappling with these issues of how do we go from where we are to where we want to be? How do we trust each other? How do we struggle? How do we navigate the difficult history and create a path forward that is dignified for more than a few people, right? And so these are my areas of focus. Everything that I'm up to has a path, ways forward. The S is there because usually it needs to be somewhat of a Swiss Army knife for people to see that it's safe for them to make a move. This is where I really get to leverage being a multi-heritage person and really steep in empathy for the discomfort that we have created through our storytelling and through the narratives that we've adopted. All of my work starts with agreements when I'm holding space for a community. I may make these agreements publicly. I may make these agreements privately with myself. I may make these agreements with a physical location to care for it, to be present, and to steward it. When I am at my best, I am practicing these agreements, right? The people in my life experience that. When I'm not at my best, the people who know me well experience some of the edges of these agreements that I strive to operate from, right? And so I'm saying these things inside of the personal work that it takes to show up well is often left out of the equation. And I really want us to know, yes, there are things, LinkedIn is packed with all sorts of accolades, but the self-care and the interpersonal work is where I really wanted to share from. So those agreements are amazing. They look great. They're really challenging to keep in order when you're like coming to the church and there's a homeless person sleeping and this is going on and the alarm is happening. So this is the mechanism for me, is myself, others, and social and cultural systems having to interlock and work well together. The challenge with this for me personally and for the communities that I am from is that some of the system and cultural context have been harmful and have lacked grace, and maybe have even had violence or atrocities and other traumas attached to them. So those agreements can only work when I'm able to implement grace as well, and demanding the same from others constantly, right? So not just practicing those agreements with myself, but inviting others to do the same, or saying, hey, I don't understand this. How does myself interact with the rest of this community or the culture? And then how do we look at the history of labor and dignity as we have that conversation? It may be that we're coming to a conversation with very different mechanisms, very different systems, cultures, relationships to ourselves. And so those agreements have to take into account the kaleidoscope of humanity and how a person's humanity may have been negotiated. So the awareness piece continues where this is how I define wellness, okay? When I am at my best, I am experiencing these things, right? I have a positive state of being. I am operating from a life continuum. I can see that things are going well. Only when these things are happening can I experience truly being of service and being present with folks, looking at a building that might have a leak and still seeing something awesome that could happen there and visualizing it, picking up the phone, getting people enrolled in that, okay? So the way that I synthesize this for myself, these 10 inquiries, is discover, embody, heal, right? So I can discover that something's not working, or that I don't prefer something, or that something is unwell for me or for someone in the space. I can embody that. It's true for them, may not be true for me. And I can participate in the healing of that individual, even a physical location, if there's a major issue that needs attention, et cetera. So this mantra is what gets me through a lot of my work, right? I want to bring some attention to number 9. The social injustice and lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion perpetuates societal unwellness, okay? So I mentioned that earlier about the dignity and about the history of labor. Those dynamics create a lack of wellness, right? It may not be being created for you, but it may be being created for someone who's ultimately a part of your mutual fund, let's say, right? So if people are operating businesses that you generate from, there's an important interest in that, even if it's just economic, right? And for us as spiritual beings and Christians, for the most part, our orientation gets to be operational here, where we can help people with healing just by looking for the dignity in all of our interactions. Again, back to this wellness. Am I eating? Am I moving? Am I reflecting? Am I relating? Am I seeing other human beings, right? And how am I being of service? All right. So when I'm doing these things, I can actively serve from a very powerful space. And this is what it looks like in terms of being a part of a team, being a part of a community. Yeah. And so I'll conclude my time here, and we can get into specifics or organizations or how much money has been generated through specific actions. But I really wanted to share from a place of self-care, right? And from what it takes in order to do the work, not just kind of highlight what the work is and focus in that regard. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shalonda. What I really am enjoying are these different paths, particularly, Shalonda, what I liked about what you said, and we'll hopefully have a great discussion about it. If you are not prepared yourself to go into the arena, you can't be engaged in the public square or the civic arena, or you could call it the Coliseum sometimes. But you have to have some resilience. You have to build yourself up. You have to be healthy because it's quite a tough space. So I really appreciate that. And I think that very, very practical and clear ways that you've pioneered and taught others to enter it. So thank you for that. Next, I want to switch over to Annabel Park. And Annabel, could you share with us how you've engaged in the public square?
Hi, everybody. I feel like I want to spend some time talking about strategy and what I think is my theory of change, because I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what is the most effective way to be a change maker right now. What actually creates change, because right now it's discouraging. A lot of people, I think, believe that we're just not making any progress. In fact, we're going backwards. And I think we have to really face that possibility. Are we actually going backwards? What has gone wrong? And so in a way, I would like to kind of take a step back to sort of look at the big picture, like where are we as a country right now? And what can we as citizens who care about humanity, who care about creating a better world, who feel almost desperate to try to save our democracy, like what can we do? What should we do? Is there anything we can do? So that's where my head is these days. And I have days, as Rich knows, when I feel like it's hopeless. um, and then and other days when I'm like, you know what? Damn it. I'm gonna double down. I'm gonna like work even harder. I think I figured out a way. Anyway, so I go back and forth. I'm sorry, Rich. um, but what I want to share with you is that this is what I think works, in my opinion. I think what works is to be able to take a look at what is happening, especially in and around what I call propaganda. You know, what is the story being advanced by various people? Try to discern whether or not there's truth to it. Assume that there are people who are trying to confuse us or deliberately lie to us, right? And that there are a lot of people in our media ecosystem engaging in what I consider to be misdirection. Like this is a term that magicians use to talk about their trick, where they, get you to look at their hand, and then they use their other hand to do something else. So they constantly misdirect us. And I think our job as activists is to figure out what is the thing that they're trying to actually hide. So there's this, so instead of just focusing on the hand waving in front of our face, look at what could be happening on the other around their back. And so I feel that's sort of like the job. Like, okay, this is what's being talked about. Everyone's talking about critical race theory. Okay, is it really about critical race theory, or is there something else going on? Right? There's all this anti-immigrant talk. Immigrants are doing this. They're criminals. They are rapists. Are they really? What is it? What is it that they're trying to hide here? And so I think we have to first really see what is the story that they're trying to advance, and then what I want to call counter narrate that. So this is the story they're trying to advance. So let's figure out what is the core issue that they're actually trying to hide, and talk about that. Make that the topic. So it's a little bit like, if you guys have done martial arts, it's sort of using their energy to try to step out of the way and then attack them with the truth. And so I want to show you a couple of videos that I've done to try to do this kind of Akita move of sort of figuring out what they're saying and then looking at the real issue. So what there, I don't want to spend too much time on, but one of them is about the immigration issue. So I'm going to show you a video clip from my film 9500 Liberty, where we had a big Arizona type fight about like a county ordinance trying to make anyone who looks illegal suspect and arrestable. It was crazy. This is in Prince William County in Virginia. So this is I interviewed a Catholic priest who and I think it's relevant for this conversation. So I'm just going to play a little bit of that just to give you a flavor of what I'm talking about when I say counter narrate.
All of you must be willing to obey completely those who rule over you. There are no authorities except ones God has chosen. Those who now rule have been chosen by God. So when you oppose the authorities, you are opposing those whom God has appointed. Those who do that will be judged. God instituted this government. This is part of His plan. Those leaders aren't just there for a whim. They're there because God has a purpose here. So when you are going against them, when you're trying to break laws, when you're trying to go against the laws and policies that are part of God's plan, you are actually fighting against God.
I think what St. Paul was talking about was the law of Christ. And as I remember, the law of Christ, as was formulated in John's Gospel, is love one another as I have loved you. Or another formulation of the law is love your neighbor as yourself. I'm not sure that that's the law that Greg is applying, and that should be the criterion or the test. But there are certain laws that are not in accordance with human rights and justice. And when that's the case, we should, in a democratic society, work to reform the laws. And that's why our Catholic bishops are saying that the issue of immigration isn't obedience to the law, but the issue is comprehensive reform of existing laws.
So, I just wanted to give you a sense for what I was talking about. I'm going to send you guys links to the film. So it's a full-length documentary. And then a YouTube channel that has a bunch of different video clips of people engaging with these issues in different ways. But basically, what he goes on to say is it's not, so he's clearly wrong about obeying existing laws and focusing on who's illegal and not legal. But he says the real issue is housing shortage. So some of the problems came about in Prince William County because there was a housing shortage, and then the prices of houses were going up, and people couldn't afford rent. Anyway, so that's part of the thing that was going on, and Reverend William Barber, who is like a civil rights leader, who started the More Monday movement in North Carolina and now is leading the Poor People's Campaign. And a lot of people compare him to Dr. King. And I spent a year following him. And Reverend Barber does a similar thing, is to just take a look at what the right wing, like really extreme white supremacist right wing people were saying in North Carolina, and saying, this is what they're saying, but this is what they don't want you to see. And it has to do with things like income inequality, right? It has to do with their attempts to, to be able to, instead of taking responsibility for any of the decisions that led to people living in great poverty in many parts of the state, again, using immigrants, blaming the immigrants, blaming federal government, blaming Barack Obama, just finding other people to blame so that we don't talk about the things that we need to talk about. So I And I don't know if you guys, I'm assuming you guys know Reverend Barber, but we made some of the early videos of him that went viral. That helped, Reverend Barber become sort of a national figure. So we worked closely with him. And one of the videos that we did with him was called The Third Reconstruction. And, this is his idea that what we're going through right now since Obama's election in 2008 is our third attempt to reconstruct our country. And so I just want to play just a very short clip of that.
So the Reconstruction movement was ended about late 1800s. Then you get the 1960s. That's the second Reconstruction. Dr. King, March on Washington, 50 years ago, a man in whose shadow we stand, talked about the emancipation, but he also said that things were not yet where they should be. From 54, Brown versus Board of Education, all the way to the death of Dr. King, you have this massive movement, blacks and whites, Jews and Gentiles, all coming together, reconstructing the nation. How was that stopped? They attacked voting rights, they attacked education, they attacked progressive tax policy, but they also attacked leaders. Killed Martin, Medgar, Malcolm, Kennedy, Robert and John, hundreds of others, and that shut down the second Reconstruction. Then you have something strange happen. You have a guy named Barack Obama to run for the president in 2008. And guess what he does? He runs a campaign rooted in the idea of fusion politics, like you had in the 1800s, like you saw in the 1960s. And guess what? He wins in places like North Carolina, in the South. And how does he win? The electorate is broad and it's deep and it's young and it's old and it's LGBT and it's black and it's Hispanic and it's Asian and it's people who want to push America beyond the vestiges of racism. And so his election represents the possibility of a third Reconstruction.
I mean, the thing I really wanted to emphasize was, I think in order for us to be really good activists right now, we have to think of our favorite teacher and channel that teacher. Because the only way to counter-narrate is to educate people. And so the best activists are teachers. And not only do we have to teach people what the truth is, what's really being done, sleight of hand, but to figure out what they can do to stop it. Get them to take action, get them to vote, get them to show up for events. And that, I think that is the best thing we could be doing right now, is to approach activism as teaching. Okay.
Thank you, Annabelle. We're so lucky to have such a diverse group of people who've done so many great things in the public square and can share their diverse stories. I feel really blessed that we have this in our denomination, in our community. Now I'm going to go next, and boy, everybody's done such a concise job of being right on time. Let's see if the minister, for once, cannot go over time. That's always a problem, so please, you have to alert me. But I'm going to try to keep it short. I wanted to talk just a little biographically, and Rebecca gave my bio, but on a more personal note, I'll just share this, that the reason I got involved with politics was because in the 80s, I was an AIDS buddy. And that meant that you visited a person with AIDS, once a month or something, but you brought food or something like that. But these were people basically who were kind of been like lepers. People had ignored, families had rejected. And so I was very afraid. I was a gay man. I was in my 20s. I looked at the obituaries and saw gay men in their 30s and 40s dying every week. So it was a very scary time. And it was a great spiritual time, really, for me, too. And I was working at the chapel at Harvard Divinity. And so I started visiting. And so when you're visiting someone at that age and the average time for a buddy was 2 months, and then they would die. So you're dealing with death at a young age. You're dealing with delivering groceries. So really, you're learning about the healthcare system. You're learning about discrimination. You're learning about restaurants that won't serve them. You're learning about how to fight their landlord who's trying to kick them out of their building. So it was just a huge education for me about like, wow. And nobody really cares. And that's how I felt. I still feel today. Nobody really cared about them. There was sort of an attitude at the time, let them die. It's God's punishment. They've kind of made the wrong choices. So it was very lonely for those folks, and family members generally just were embarrassed. So they would say they have leukemia. So that was eye-opening for me. The solution from our community, the gay community and the AIDS community, was mainly ACT UP. It was mainly protests, screaming at politicians. And you can understand the anger. I could understand the anger, right? Many of the people who were protesting would be dead in a couple of years. So this was like life and death, and you're literally screaming for your life. What occurred to me though at that time, and I was not political at all, but I said, oh my God, I'm a moderate Republican. I grew up right near where Paige lives, in Bucks County, and sort of just a, fiscally conservative, socially moderate Republican in those days. But I thought, oh my gosh, if we don't speak to America and educate, as Annabel just said, in a language that they can hear, we're not going to make any progress. And this is too serious. We can't just be right and righteous. We're going to have to persuade people who don't get it that this is something they need to care about. And so that's actually what kind of made me political, was more AIDS than anything. And that led to, as we said in my bio, I got involved in politics, and I got appointed by the governor of Massachusetts to manage adolescent health. And the real reason I only had a theological background, the only reason they appointed me, is there's no Republicans in Massachusetts. So they needed somebody, and I was like 29, and they're like, okay, what do you want to do? What do you care about? Kids. Okay, good. No Republicans are fighting for those jobs. We'll give you the adolescent health program. So no background. And I get to do the school-based health centers, community-based health centers that we're pioneering, AIDS campaign, and the first bullying campaign for LGBT youth, and passed the first law in the state. And the governor was really great. It was controversial to appoint me in the first place, and he did it, Bill Weld. So it was and it showed me, oh my gosh, what you can do on the other side of government. This thing is so powerful. One edict, and we could be speaking to all the school systems. We could be doing, so it was just very interesting to see the other side of that equation. Long story short is then I started educating other conservatives around the country, and I translated the issues into their language. And I would travel around and eventually moved to Washington, did it full time. But the key was, for me, and the big takeaway, and something we've lost now, is that the reason why those issues ended up being successful is they were translated into the value systems of the audiences that you needed to get on board. In other words, screaming at people does not work. That's just my bias. So that's how I feel about that. Shaming people does not work as far as persuasion. Calling people idiots or bigots, or, I understand why people do it. It actually does not move the needle as far as persuasion. And when you're in a very small group, you don't have the luxury. You have to build allies of people outside yourself. And you have to build, in this country, allies in conservative America. That can't be a one-party thing. So that was kind of my work. And then worked on, AIDS funding and so forth. And you'd be very surprised at the narratives that Republicans actually took the lead on some of these things, like fast tracking AIDS drugs or getting funds. It doesn't fit the narrative that people hold. I realize that, but that's literally what happened, and that's the breakthrough. So when I finished that work after a decade, I started working with nonprofits, and that's how I did the AIDS in Africa program. How do you persuade Americans to care about an epidemic in Africa? And how do you get Republicans interested? And what we did is we took members of Congress and their staff to Africa to see what was going on. And, I had to cajole them, and I'd say, we're going to do these visits, and, and by the way, we're going to do a safari. And I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I had to throw in this safari, and they're like, oh, safari and, Botswana. Okay, well, and it's all paid for. And I said, it's going to be the only thing you're going to really remember that you did this year, because all you're doing is partisan bickering. And it's not, and I'd say, why did you come here? Why'd you come to Washington? And they said, I came to do good. And I'm like, well, you are in the most powerful position possible. And so they went to Africa, and they became the champions for the issue. And we passed the largest spending program since the Marshall Plan for international AIDS for the AIDS program, and really avoided what would have been, it was horrible, but it would have been 1,000 times worse. And it was a good moment. And when I see those people today, they say, that wasn't the most important thing I did that year. It's the thing I tell my kids every year. It's like the thing I'm most proud about. And so there's a moral thing too. That's persuasion. It's like you can do the right thing. It's not just that everybody's manipulated by money and power, and they certainly are. And I live in Washington. Trust me, I am not naive about narcissism and the power of money. And every time I was lobbying on any issue, I always knew there was 10 other people from the financial industry also lobbying coming in the office next to whatever issue they were lobbying on. Where I've shifted lately, though, so we've talked about how do you pass laws, and I used to teach organizations how do you pass legislation, how do you create a coalition. That's the secret. It has to be bipartisan if you want to pass anything. Well, that's actually pretty much out the window. I know even our trainers that came to train us, they didn't really mention any strategy very much on the legislation they were talking about of like building a bipartisan coalition. Most sides are kind of just performing. They're just saying to their audiences, left or right, this is what we care about, but it's not an agenda to pass something as much as it would have been, because it's very hard. So where I am now is I'm very concerned beyond left and right. I'm very concerned personally, and I've preached about this, that I do feel like we could be headed to a civil war. Because when people feel they can no longer speak in the public square and they can't be heard, they give up on persuasion. And when people give up on persuasion, they do turn to violence. And so I know that sounds dramatic, but anyway, that's just where I am. I can talk more about it. And what I really believe that the church could do, and what I want our church in DC, and I'm proud to have Annabel and Shalonda as members, I want us to go out and organize faith communities to save civil society. And I'm not concerned about left, right, or I'm not talking about parties. I'm just talking about saving civil society. And I'm talking right now with a rabbi in Northern Virginia who has been doing this democracy work through the Reformed Jewish community. And I think it has to be ecumenical. And I think the Swedenborgian church is unique because we have this radically inclusive theology about faith that makes us incredible ecumenical partners. And we also have a teaching that it's not what you say, it's what you do. And we have to do. We can't just talk about this stuff on Sundays. We've got to figure out how to engage. And I'm much less interested in where people decide to engage, left or right, Republican, Democrat. But how do you engage in a way that's inspired by love of the neighbor and love of God? And if we can do more of that. And we need people in both political parties. And now, as you probably know, the political parties are kind of divided. We're really dealing with 4 completely different groups now that are at war within themselves. The bitterness within the parties is as intense as left, right. So that's kind of where I am right now. I'm looking at how can we train people, engage people to be persuasive, to engage in the public square. And I'll just close my comments by saying what I loved about what Paige said for me was that there's no excuse for saying I can't do something. Paige just gave all these very concrete ways that you can do something, and she does, and she has her whole life. And I love the use aspect. And what I liked about what Shalonda shared is that we're going to have to teach spiritual resilience, because the public square is toxic. I cannot tell you how brutalized I was when I did my political stuff. You can imagine, right? A gay Republican. To be blunt, I got the shit kicked out of me. So it's brutal. And so it's so toxic that no one wants to get involved, and you keep out. So I really like Shalonda about how you prepare yourself for that. And what I liked about what Annabel said was that it's about education, the teacher, it's about persuasion. And that's kind of where I am. We didn't organize it that way, but when I heard those comments, I really appreciated that.